When we look back at the history of warfare, there are few battles that truly stand out as turning points, not just in a war, but in the course of human history. One of those battles took place on the banks of the Volga River between August 1942 and February 1943. It is remembered as the Battle of Stalingrad, the bloodiest confrontation in human history, and the battle that marked the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. To understand Stalingrad, we must first understand the world in which it happened. By mid-1941, Adolf Hitler had launched Operation Barbarossa, the massive invasion of the Soviet Union. It was the largest military operation in history. 3 million German soldiers, supported by tanks, artillery, and aircraft, swept across the Soviet border. In just months, they captured vast territories, millions of prisoners, and seemed unstoppable. But the German dream of a quick victory was shattered by the Soviet will to resist and by the Russian winter. By 1942, Hitler was determined to renew his offensive in the east. This time, his eyes were fixed on the oil-rich Caucasus and the industrial city on the Volga that bore the name of his enemy, Stalingrad. To Hitler, the city was not only a strategic hub for transport and industry, it was a symbolic prize. To capture Stalingrad would mean humiliating Joseph Stalin himself. And so, in the summer of 1942, German forces turned toward the south. What followed would become a nightmare that consumed over 2 million lives. Stalingrad was an industrial city stretched for miles along the Volga River. It had factories producing tractors, weapons, and steel critical for the Soviet war effort. But more than its industry, it was a gateway. Whoever controlled Stalingrad controlled access to the Volga, the lifeline connecting central Russia to the Caspian Sea and beyond. In late August 1942, the German Luftwaffe unleashed a bombardment that reduced much of the city to rubble. Thousands of civilians were killed in a single day. For the Germans, this was meant to soften resistance. But in reality, it created the perfect battlefield for the Soviets. Streets filled with debris became natural defenses. Factories, basements, and ruined houses turned into fortresses. On one side stood the German Sixth Army, commanded by General Friedrich Paulus. They were supported by allied Romanian, Hungarian, and Italian divisions, well-armed and highly experienced. They were the spearhead of Hitler's advance. On the other side were the Soviets, under General Vasily Chukov and the strategic guidance of Marshal Georgy Zhukov. Their orders were clear: defend Stalingrad at all costs. Stalin himself had issued Order No. 227, not a step back. Retreat was forbidden. From September onward, the battle turned into a brutal urban war unlike anything the Germans had faced before. In open fields, German tanks and air power had proven devastating. But in the ruins of Stalingrad, that advantage disappeared. The Soviets adopted a tactic known as hugging the enemy. Soldiers stayed as close as possible to German lines, sometimes only meters apart, to neutralize the Germans' ability to call in artillery or airstrikes. This forced relentless close-quarters combat. Buildings were fought over floor by floor, room by room, sometimes even hand-dash to dash-hand. The Germans nicknamed this hellish environment Rattenkrieg, the War of the Rats. Snipers, flamethrowers, and grenades dominated the fighting. The massive Red October steel factory, the tractor factory, and the grain elevator became legendary battlegrounds, each defended to the last man. Life for civilians who remained was unbearable. They hid in basements, starving and freezing, often caught in crossfire. For many, survival was simply impossible. By November 1942, the Germans had captured most of the city, but the Soviets clung to narrow strips of land along the Volga. Supplies were ferried across the river under constant bombardment. It seemed the city might finally fall, but then came the Soviet counterstroke, Operation Uranus. On November 19, 1942, while the Germans were bogged down inside the city, the Red Army launched massive attacks on the weaker Romanian and Hungarian forces guarding the German flanks. In a matter of days, they broke through, encircling the entire German Sixth Army inside Stalingrad. Over 300,000 Axis soldiers were trapped. Hitler ordered Paulus to hold out, promising that supplies would be flown in. But the Luftwaffe could deliver only a fraction of what was needed. Hunger and frost became as deadly as Soviet bullets. Through December and January, conditions inside the pocket grew desperate. Soldiers ate horses, then dogs, then rats. Frostbite, disease, and despair spread through the ranks. Yet Hitler refused to allow Paulus to retreat. Finally, in late January 1943, the Soviets crushed the last resistance. On January 31st, Paulus surrendered his headquarters. By February 2nd, the last German troops had laid down their arms. Out of more than 300,000 men, only about 90,000 survived to be taken prisoner, and fewer than 6,000 of them would ever return home after the war. The price of Stalingrad was staggering. Historians estimate that over 2 million people, soldiers and civilians, were killed, wounded, or captured. It was the single bloodiest battle in human history. Entire divisions were annihilated. Families were torn apart. The city itself was reduced to rubble, yet its spirit endured. Stalingrad was more than a Soviet victory. It was the turning point of World War II. Until then, the German army had seemed invincible. After Stalingrad, the myth of Nazi supremacy was broken. The Soviets seized the initiative and would never again lose it. From this moment, the Red Army began its long push westward, all the way to Berlin. For Hitler, the defeat was catastrophic. He had sacrificed one of his best armies in pursuit of a symbolic city, and his prestige among allies and his own generals was shaken. For Stalin and the Soviet people, Stalingrad became a symbol of resilience, sacrifice, and ultimate triumph. Looking back, the Battle of Stalingrad teaches us profound lessons. First, it shows the limits of military power when driven by arrogance. Hitler's obsession with capturing a city for its name blinded him to strategic realities. He underestimated both the Soviet will and the brutal challenges of urban warfare. Second, it reminds us of the sheer human cost of war. 2 million lives lost in 6 months, a number almost beyond comprehension. Behind every statistic was a soldier freezing in a trench, a mother searching for her child, a family destroyed forever. Third, Stalingrad demonstrates the power of morale and determination. The Soviets fought not only for a city, but for survival itself. Their refusal to surrender, even when reduced to a strip of land by the river, turned the tide of the war. Finally, it warns us that war is not glory, it is destruction. Stalingrad remains a monument to human suffering, but also to the strength of human resilience. Today, the city of Stalingrad is known as Volgograd. It has been rebuilt from the ashes, its streets once again filled with life. But monuments and memories remain, reminding us of the terrible winter when the fate of the world was decided on its soil. The Battle of Stalingrad stands as one of the greatest struggles in human history. A story of brutality and suffering, but also of courage and endurance. When we remember Stalingrad, we are not just remembering a military victory, we are remembering what humanity is capable of, in both destruction and survival. And perhaps, that is the greatest lesson of all, that peace is never to be taken for granted, because the alternative is a nightmare we should never allow to return.